Well, and it has the ability to impact a broad number of citizens kind of in closer to their day-to-day actions. In Arkansas, a county gets hacked, then, possibly I can't register a deed for a real estate transaction I did. I can't get a marriage license. There are a variety of kind of very frequent services that citizens use that are negatively impacted. So I think, that's another kind of maybe counterintuitive thing is the closer you get to the citizen, the more likely some sort of incident is likely to adversely affect the citizen, other than just everybody is so numb from how many tens of times your information has been, breached into the dark web that I think people are numb to that. But when I can't go to a portal or go to an office and conduct some publicly, required business, then that hits me more than something that happens, 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C.
Okay, we are rolling. Should have asked you, is that a gold record up top there, John, from your early band days?
I see it in the background there. I'm not even sure what that is.
Or Frisbee?
Silver record for us sponsoring a local nonprofit.
Not your for 5,000 albums sold from your band back in the 70s.
No, that'd be a better story.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, thanks for coming back on the program. Really appreciate it. I know you're super busy fighting cybercrime and all those fun things that you guys do over there at Mainstream. I wanted to carry on from our last conversation where we started to talk about state government activities around cyber and everything that we see now out of Washington, not to get into politics, but there's a lot of push into regulation to deregulate or to look at what are we doing from a regulation bureaucracy standpoint, and what can we do to improve things to the extent that those things actually produce good results. Maybe I'd like to start with getting your take on where now we're early first quarter 2025. Where do you think we stand, at least from if not the United States, but at least from the Arkansas, from a local state government cyber preparedness standpoint? Could you talk about that and maybe give us your feelings?
Okay. I think awareness has certainly increased from what I would have even said, 3 or 4 years ago. I know, you've had some conversations with the gentleman who was the former state CIO, about Arkansas's specific progress in terms of response and preparedness, but it's very much, I think, at least in Arkansas here, we're very much in the still educational aspect of trying to get to an increased state of preparedness. And I think you have to consider just the patchwork and the number of stakeholders that are involved in a statewide public sector. So there's the state government, which has the resources to fund, do research, and deploy the protections that we're used to talking about every day. But then as and I'm sure it varies from state to state. You and I also had conversations about just the patchwork of different regulations and different approaches that different entities are taking. But as at least in Arkansas, as you get down into the local governments or the local entities like counties and cities and school districts and water systems, that you end up dealing with just a ton of quasi-independent small businesses that may not have the business awareness of what risks are out there, and then resources about how to address the risks are a completely different issue.
That's interesting. I'm going to pick up on that in a moment, because that really gets to another issue that I've been hearing, and I think you and I may have talked about it, and related to reactive providers really being embedded in some of these local governments. And well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But on the issue of federal deregulation, or at least regulatory scrutiny, is that happening at the state level? Like, is what's happening at the federal government happening at a state government at all?
No, I think actually it's probably the inverse is happening. I think the states, at least again, what I'm familiar with is the state government is increasing its efforts to kind of raise the bar for the minimum to rigor of what a local government has to do to be secure. And I think and the federal's deregulating is, I think the states have realized before, maybe due to insurance industry, cyber insurance drivers that they've had to take a lot of this on themselves anyway. So I think that movement was already in place, and I think like I said, the inverse is true.
It's not necessarily a bad thing, though, John, is it? I mean, if the feds are going to take not a backseat, but less of a, the state of Arkansas and probably all the other states in the U.S. and probably true in the European Union, probably true in Canada, probably true in almost every country around the globe that has modernized cyber infrastructure that is present. The more local you get, the closer you get to the entity that you're trying to protect, the better, right? I mean, that almost always is true. It's probably axiomatic. So if the feds are going through a deregulatory cleanse, we'll call it that, the states doing the inverse, as you said, is probably exactly what we wanted to happen. True? Did we cut out?
Yeah, you were kind of cutting out. I didn't know if that was on my end or your end.
No worries. So you want me to ask the question again?
Please. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was just talking about the federal deregulatory cleanse that we seem to be going through right now. If that's happening, then, as you said, the inverse happening at a state level is probably not only not a bad thing, it's probably a good thing, because the closer you are to the entity that you're trying to impact, the better, right? I mean, there's probably a really good argument to be made that the states are in a very good position relative to the federal government to protect their own local governments.
Yeah, and I think you're probably in cybersecurity more than anything, or certainly not less than anything else, the ability to write, there is no one size fits all solution to this. And I think the closer you get to, in the public sector, the closer you get to the citizen or the taxpayer or the user of services, the better you're able to understand exactly what the expectations are and what the requirements are. Because, the Fed's coming down with one set of requirements that they think applies to every, small business. Well, small business, according to the definition, a small business starts, goes up to 500 people. There's a big difference between a 2-person entity and a 500-person entity. And so I think as you get lower and lower, those one-size-fits-all regulations and solutions just don't economically make sense for the smaller entities.
No doubt they don't make sense from an economic standpoint. But the reality is, and John, you brought this to my attention, I think a year plus ago. I mean, Arkansas, not the only state, by the way, to go through this, but Arkansas had a pretty bad experience with a local government ransomware cyber attack, as I recall it. I don't remember the specifics, but it was happening and probably still does continue to happen all throughout the world and throughout the United States. These are small entities. I mean, these are small local governments that are not that different from a small business, as you pointed out. What is their current status or ability to defend themselves? Does it exist?
It does exist. And I think the challenge that you have, again, is, whereas in a small business, you have ownership who at least is, operationally understands their business. When you get into the public sector, you have the possibility of new ownership coming in periodically every few number of years, and they may have no prior experience about doing this or no, and then you start layering in fairly new business topics like cybersecurity and risk management. And I think that's, like I said, that's where we're at, is we're very much in a educational phase of helping these new elected officials and these people that are working in these small entities kind of understand that there's more to say grace over than maybe there was 10 years ago.
Do you think, John, that the local governments acknowledge now that they are legitimate targets?
Well, yeah,
Let's just start there. They know that?
I would say that has definitely amped up. When we first started getting involved with the county and local governments here in Arkansas, you'd see them at a conference, even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, and you'd ask them about what they're doing about cybersecurity, and the stock answer was always, my provider handles that. And just over the last 3 years, just the awareness and their willingness to engage, and their awareness that they are targets, and they know colleagues in their industry, I guess, who have been the victims of this, and and none of them want the citizens in their area to be affected the way that they've read stories about people in adjacent communities.
So I want to ask a very delicate question. I understand going in that this is delicate, but if we know that the local, smaller local governments particularly are really vulnerable, and that smaller local governments are using probably more often than not a more reactive IT provider than a proactive managed service provider. I use those terms very purposefully. Have they reached what is your consensus around general knowledge of we either have to upskill those reactive providers currently embedded on the front lines of local government defense, or we need to swap them out for legitimate MSPs? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like, in a lot of cases with MSPs, it's clients that are leading them to be more mature and to do better. I think in this case, has to start with the governments, that they have to understand what exactly they're getting from their providers, and they have to be more formal about what they're asking and more clear about what they're asking their providers to do. Because you've got, historically you've got, I need you to maintain these computers, which is a very traditional kind of break fix kind of
maintain.
model.
I love how very generic that is. Maintain.
Yeah. But now we're going to, okay, I need you to deploy these tools. I need you to patch this software. I need you to make sure these are backed up. So the ask needs to increase from the client side, and that's going to drive the providers to get better, or drive the governments to look for more mature providers.
So I agree with you. I think it's a really important point, right? The customer, in this case, the local governments, have to become educated and enough to the point where they start to ask intelligent questions of their provider, which should, in theory and in practice, lead to you may not be the best company. You may be the company that installed all this equipment, just fine, 5 years ago, but that doesn't make you an MSP. So I understand that there's also maybe a financial impact here, or a financial economic issue at play. And I'll just put it as, the smaller you go as a local government, I'm assuming that you may have some small counties, townships, parishes, cities, municipalities, all across the United States, that even if they knew, John, everything that you're talking about, they might say, that's all fine. We don't have the budget to do that. Where's this money going to come from? And then there you get into the legacy. The MSP brought it up. The MSP presented it to the customer. The customer said, I don't have money. Sorry, make do as best you can.
And I think I personally think that's the role that the state level needs to be stepping in, because as their legislatures are meeting and deciding how to allocate funds each cycle, there has to be more money spent on cybersecurity across the state. It's just a fact. And as a citizen, it's hard for me to look at, I live in the most populous county in the largest city in the most populous county in Arkansas. And I feel that the citizen who lives in the smallest community in the smallest county in Arkansas has the same right for the same expectation that their information be safe and that their services be available and secure as I do, and that's very much a resource problem, but there's also an expectation and an obligation, I think, on the government side to that's a minimum level of care.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's ever a study done up, but I mean, just what Arkansas went through however long ago, I mean, there's a definite impact, an economic impact to a local government having that type of mischief done to it from a cyber standpoint. The state's going to end up picking up some of that tab, I would imagine.
Well, that's Arkansas has created this cyber response fund and cyber response board that is supposed to be a clearinghouse and like a resource for these local governments when they have an incident. But I think that's the first step. I think the second step is you have to be more diligent in committing funds to these local governments to help them be more secure.
Yeah. So, well, look, let's assume that's something that we should champion and support state governments to do, because I think that what I've heard now in a handful of litigation cases involving MSPs. Now, this is not, I'll say, this is not involving any plaintiffs that were governments. These are all private sector businesses. But the arguments are the same, which is, I thought my MSP handled that. I think that that's a big threshold we have to cross. We have to really focus on, no, you were not using a real MSP. That was a break-fix company. They did not do what an MSP does. Therefore, really good reason why you got breached, why you had a cyber attack that was successful. And I think that there's then the second question of, if you were working with a real MSP, they likely would have presented you with some things that you could do, easy things, but they're going to require some budget. They're going to require some money that you apply to this. And I think both of those are going to happen before we see some meaningful change at the local level. Well, what say you?
Yeah. And, and I think we've, it's a matter of public record here in Arkansas that, Mainstream is in the middle of a project for the state of Arkansas where we're going in and assessing each county government and each city government in the state relative to our state's Bureau of Legislative Audit. They have a set of cybersecurity best practices. So we're going in and assessing each of these governments against this set of best practices. And then we deliver, our results, which point out, make recommendations about areas where there's a gap and how they might go about closing that gap. And what we have heard is, we talk a lot about the break fix providers. They want to get better, and they want to, they don't want to lose business, and they want to help their clients succeed as much as I do. So we have heard from several of the providers that are incumbents in these governments, and they are excited about us providing this information to the government, because it opens the door for a conversation because historically the provider might be asking for, let us help you get better. And there was either a lack of awareness or a lack of prioritization in that. But having this assessment done and these kind of objective recommendations is kind of opening the door for these conversations where there might be resources, they're just not prioritized. But then there's also an awareness of who's responsible for what and where the gaps are.
Do you think, your personal opinion, do you think that most of those smaller, those local providers dealing with local government customers, do you think they're really legitimate MSPs, or are they just, but they haven't had success in converting a local government customer to buy the fundamental technologies necessary, or are they reactive or something else?
There's a mix. I mean, some of them are definitely not MSPs. That's not their model, but it's also, some of these areas, there might not be a client that has the expectation of having an MSP. So if they're a local provider, they might not have any clients that are driving them to get better or to move up that maturity scale. So that's what I see.
That's an interesting point, John, because I'm now wondering, I think one of the scenarios was it was a software that was used by the local governments, and it was a software vendor who had been breached. And I don't know exactly if they were the first line of defense for tech support, but I'm wondering if that's very, very prevalent, where you have break fix reactive providers who are really in there through no fault of their own, but the customer, because lack of budget or other reasons, they say, no, you're fine. We're not going to go with an MSP because we know that we're going to spend more. I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but something tells me this is just more prevalent. There's a lot of those break fix companies out there at that level. I don't know.
Yes, especially as you get away from the larger metropolitan areas, and can't stress enough that when you get into some of these rural areas, that there might be one IT provider in a 3-county area who's, and they're the option that the local entities have, unless and historically they've had no reason to look further afield than that. So I think there's an opportunity, through what we're doing to coach up some of these break fix providers that are out there in the rural areas, and it's in addition to the primary goal of coaching up the governments and educating everyone on where the gaps are and where the opportunities are.
But it seems like if what you say comes true, and I think that it will, that the coaching up, as you call it, it's going to come first from the customer. If the customer, in this case, the local government is going to say to a provider, well, I'm getting news or updates from our state leaders that we need to do this, this, and this. We need to start backing up our data. Can you do this for us? Well, we don't really do that. We do this. We can sell you a server, but we don't back up data. We can't do multi-factor. Like, they might actually start to have those conversations, and either they upskill the provider, or the provider says, you know what, let's bring in a normal MSP and let them do their thing.
Yeah, and I think we'll see all different scenarios along that continuum play out in the coming months, not just in Arkansas, but around the country. Because again, as I don't think Arkansas is unique, and the awareness has really ratcheted up in the last, couple of years, and there are starting to be some serious conversations at the state level and at the local levels about what do we need to do to improve our preparedness.
Yeah. I said I wasn't going to ask any political questions, but I got to ask you some political questions because they're really good. They're relevant to this. So, back to the topic of the feds. So we're seeing entire departments shut down, transferred over, folding them up into other agencies. So there's a lot of, it's a fluid situation, as some might say. I'm thinking about the local and state governments and their ability to be aware of some of these nation-state critical threats that are coming down and targeting them. The states by themselves, and certainly the local governments, don't really have access to the information to guard against that. In your opinion, do you think there's a legitimate role for the feds to be involved as an information clearinghouse for just disseminating information that might be relevant to a state CIO, CTO that says, hey, be prepared. You guys are likely going to get hit. Here's how it's likely going to happen. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, I think in the form of the ISACs, those are good information sharing avenues. And I think if the feds are prioritizing what they want to keep and what they want to shed, I think that the work that NIST does in crafting the frameworks and kind of doing that research on best practices and methodologies is important. Eliminating the Fed mandate or the Fed enforcement on certain things, I'm personally all for, but I really do value that consolidated research, and like you pointed out, the threat sharing. I think they weren't doing a great job in my mind of sharing the intelligence before. I always felt like they were holding it way too tightly to their vest and not releasing it in a timely fashion. So I think if the deregulation helps that, I'm all for that too. It's not everything is a nation state secret, especially when it comes to protecting our citizens and our local and state governments and our businesses.
That's a good point, John. I agree with that. So you brought up NIST. I think NIST can't go away because I think NIST has to, they have important work to do in maintaining their standard that they created. I was thinking about CISA, right? And maybe to a certain extent, the FBI, which is part of that triumvirate in terms of that clearinghouse. But, at some level, they're going to come across information, whether they have shared it in the past or not. They're going to come across some information that I have to think they're going to see first before the states and certainly before the local governments do. Is it true or not?
Yes, but I think to the extent that they can reconfigure what they're doing at the federal level to improve the effectiveness of that and the speed at which they're sharing that information. You and I have both sat in on enough briefings where, they want to talk about this code name initiative, and they will talk to anybody that asks them about it, but they can't make an announcement about it. And that always just flew all over me that, if you're...
Yeah.
This is secret, but we'll tell anybody that asks in a one-on-one conversation.
I think you're talking about, Salt Typhoon. I mean, that was one of those things where, we had some of those briefings and we were talking to a lot of MSPs about this, and then all of a sudden it starts to get, talked about in news articles online. So look, I think there's a role. I think there's legitimately a role, but I think that there's also, there has to be, as you pointed out early on in this discussion, there has to be a realization at the state and local levels that the states have to play a more pronounced role. because the feds are not going to come in here and figure out how to run a local municipality's IT better than the state government will. There's no way that happens. But I think we need to move fast. I don't think that this is like let's stand up a committee and discuss it for 12 months and come back with some I feel like action is the order of the day.
The bad guys don't seem to take a lot of time to come up with a course of action and implement it. I agree, going back to the feds real quick, I very much, like I said, I very much believe in their role as a clearinghouse or as a research organization to come up with best practices. I don't really believe in their role in establishing mandates, because they typically come with a one-size-fits-all mandate that doesn't apply. It can't work. So, to the extent that they can hang on to the clearinghouse and be a resource for the states and the local governments and for us in the private sector, I'm all for that. But I think the lower you can get in terms of mandates, I think the better.
That's an interesting point, John, because the current model, it seems like, is if a state is impacted by a cyber incident and they have some communication, let's say with the FBI or with CISA about what happened, and there's some, hey, this is how you remediate, this is what we can do to help get the data back. The feds get involved to maybe, from a law enforcement or investigatory standpoint. But what if another adjacent state wants to have that same information? The information went from state to federal and now has to go from federal back down to other state that needs to hear that. Maybe, what are your thoughts on a state peer network where that could be, the information could flow more readily? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anything that improves the speed and the flow of that intelligence and those experiences can't be bad.
Yeah, because speed is of the essence, right? I mean, we're talking about, the shame factor alone of these things and not wanting to talk about it. After you get past that, there's got to be hey, other local governments could be really helped by knowing what happened and starting to take some defensive measures, and keeping that information secret is really not good. Yeah. I'm not aware of any state peer communication method. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure of it even existing anywhere.
What's is it the MSISAC, the MSISAC?
There's like a state CTO community or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interstate intelligence sharing organization that local governments participate in, and private sector companies can participate in it as well. But I'm not sure if that's Fed, supported or operated, or if it's a lower level. But that's very much a peer-to-peer kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think they may exist informally, not as formal official membership organization, but they do happen, I think, informally and between operators.
I mean, look, until such time as we know that legitimate, well-qualified, certified MSPs are embedded at the local levels all over the United States, until we get to that point, and if we get to that point, and I think it's possible, then the MSPs actually would be a faster conduit of information traveling in their network, because MSPs have existed and operated in this fashion a lot more historically than local administrators or bureaucrats in charge of state IT systems. So until we get to that point, I think we need to do something, because it seems like it's a soft underbelly that certainly, if it's not directly correlated to, it's certainly adjacent to national critical infrastructure all over the country.
Well, and it has the ability to impact a broad number of citizens, kind of in closer to their day-to-day actions. It's in Arkansas, a county gets hacked, then, possibly I can't register a deed for a real estate transaction I did. I can't get a marriage license. There are a variety of kind of very frequent services that citizens use that are negatively impacted. So I think, that's another kind of maybe counterintuitive thing, is the closer you get to the citizen, the more likely some sort of incident is likely to adversely affect the citizen, other than just everybody is so numb from how many tens of times your information has been, breached into the dark web, that I think people are numb to that. But when I can't go to a portal or go to an office and conduct some publicly, required business, then that hits me more than something that happens, 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone's done studies on this, but I guarantee you it has a ripple effect, as you said. It does have a financial impact, productivity, efficiency impacts. I just like what the state of Arkansas is doing. I think the folks, you guys over at Mainstream are championing that, and I think that other states ought to take a page from that model and really push it out there, because it just doesn't seem there's a lot of people talking about it. Like, most of the conversations about Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon, big umbrella, nation state umbrella threats, but we got some real serious local stuff going on that is completely preventable. Like,
sure, just garden variety ransomware, they can just,
yeah.
And I guess going back to our conversation about the break fix people versus MSPs, and I think this awareness can help, but give an advantage to MSPs, as you and I both believe and understand. As the client gets more mature and has higher expectations, we are sitting here with an excellent story to tell about how we can meet your needs and help you meet your goals in terms of being secure and being available. So I think that's, at the end of the day, that's, I think we've got an advantage, and the current state of things and trend of things is playing in our favor as MSPs.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I hope you're right, John. I think that the, whether it's school districts, whether it's, courthouses, sheriff's departments, police departments, municipal buildings, water, public safety, public works, there's so much that happens at a local governmental level that is really worth protecting. So I think my sense is MSPs have, unless you're really specialized in that area, like I know some MSPs who like really do well in education, but you really need to know, because it's been traditionally bureaucratic, right? It's been really a nightmare. So unless you are used to navigating that nightmare of bureaucracy, you probably go to private sector, customers who know the worth of the data that they sit on. I just sense that there's a lot of business opportunity for the MSPs, and good. I hope they make money, because if they're making money, then they're doing something good to help protect local government.
Yeah. And I think there's, as you were kind of alluding to it, but the public sector sometimes frustrates those of us who are working primarily in the private sector, because they appear to make decisions for different reasons than we're used to from a profit incented business. And some of them are political, but some of them are just kind of the nature of how public administration works and public policy works. But they are, again, as we're climbing this awareness curve, cybersecurity is falling into one of those kind of areas that we have to take care of. So it's getting funded like the roads and the water and the other kind of critical daily services. So I think that's nothing but helping the whole general situation.
And something tells me that if what you're saying happens, it wouldn't be surprised if there's not a meaningful impact on the insurance, on the cyber insurance side of that, right? Because if the local governments start to raise their cyber defenses and decrease their claims, that's only going to help the private sector, namely MSPs and their customers.
Yeah. The cheapest claim is the one you don't have to file.
Ain't that the truth? Well, I appreciate you coming on. Keep us posted, and maybe if you don't mind, come on again in the future and give us an update if you guys have anything noteworthy happening in the state of Arkansas. Because I hear bits and pieces from different states, and I know they're all moving in kind of different stages of their cyber maturity. But I think what you guys are doing is pretty cool, and I hope that the rest of the states follow suit.
Appreciate that, and always, I always enjoy talking to you, Charles. And
all right,
looking forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely.
Take care.